Welcome back to Her Rules Radio, y'all. This is Alex Jamieson, your hostess, and this is another bonus episode for those of us who are parenting in times of crisis. And I've been hearing from a lot of my listeners, readers, and followers on Instagram that the additional and complex arrangements have been feeling a little stressful. So I'm really excited to have a dear friend, Dr. Jennifer Johnston-Jones, here on the show to lead us through, hold our hands, and help us focus on what is helpful. Jen, so good to have you here.
Oh, thanks, Al. So good to be here.
So you and I have known each other for, half of our lives at this point.
Yes, and I'll keep looking forward to more.
Since early days of college, we've known each other, and you are now an expert coach and therapist helping parents and kids. So tell us about the work you do and why you do the work you do.
Sure. Yeah. So it's been an interesting development for me. I started working with couples and then doing some corporate work and then kind of doing general, I'm a psychologist, kind of general psychotherapy. And then it hit me one day that, the best way to make a difference in the world and to truly create and prevent trauma, substance abuse, mental illness is through parenting. So I sort of plunged in, and of course I've always found my own personal calling and dharma through being a mother, and it's been the most fulfilling thing that I've ever done with my life. And so when I decided to blend, it was maybe 15 years ago, right? When my daughter was born, when I decided to really focus on nothing but parenting, I've really seen a huge, huge impact. There's so much science around it now, especially how we can combine neuroscience and the science of trauma with child rearing practices. There's some real benefits that we can incorporate when we really look at the science behind it. And it versus, maybe 20 years ago, it was sort of like, well, do I trust this quote expert? And now we know it's not about the expert, it's about the science. Mm-hmm. So I think it really is the best way to, contribute to changing our world for the better.
Okay, great. Now we're going to be talking about trauma and its impact on our emotional and even physical health and how we can help ourselves and our kids through it. So let's start by defining trauma. What is it? Because it seems like this kind of amorphous topic.
Yeah. So trauma is subjective. So for one person, being bullied might not be traumatic, but for another, it will. So we don't really have a scientific definition of trauma in that sense. What we do in terms of analyzing the science is we look at what's the imprint of the occurrence. So if there is imprint of pain and fear living inside people, and then we know it's trauma. So it could be something that seems benign, like being yelled at by a parent, or it could be, of course, the more extreme things like being in war or seeing someone die in front of you. But either way, it has the same impact. So for me, this has been the fascinating piece in parenting, is that we don't know. And although we think it's not a big deal that we, blew up at our kids, it might turn into a trauma. So for me, this has really been a lot of fuel. And with the parents and families that I work with, for understanding that every person's brain and neurology is different.
And trauma can be an acute one-time event, and it can be kind of an ongoing systemic lived-in experience, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say actually that for any unresolved trauma, because neurologically it doesn't sort of get filed away into a memory, it stays in the present part of our brain. There is a lived trauma that gets accumulated, kind of like plaque, and it calcifies. So that's why if you find yourself overreacting or trying to avoid things that might make you feel uncomfortable, it's a sign that there might be something that could be healed, that could open up all sorts of realms of freedom and possibility and living away from the primitive part of our brain into a consciousness that is truly feeling healed.
And I did want to highlight, because this is something that I don't know if I've talked about on previous episodes, but trauma can also be things like people can be traumatized by living in a racist culture. People can be traumatized by living in a sexist culture, right? So like these kind of huge systemic realities can cause trauma on the individual as well, right?
Absolutely. And oftentimes they're traumas that we are unaware of because they're so commonplace and we don't think of them as trauma. But, it's sort of like, I have some African-American friends who talk about when they go into a Whole Foods, how they feel like sometimes people are really looking at them more than usual. And they feel like they have to, prove, like, hey, I'm not going to steal anything. Like this sort of like response that is, it might seem like no one, you're overreacting. No one's looking at you. No one's wanting, but it's because they've had so many instances of that energy throughout their life oftentimes that feeling is attached to something that's actually happening as well. And it can be so minor, but our brain picks up on it, right? And there's also the way that mirror neurons work, which is, of course, when there is a strong feeling around you that we pick up on it, we essentially can experience what other people are experiencing, even if you're not having a direct conversation. It's sort of like the neurology of what we used to consider, vibes or feelings. Like that's actually mirror neurons, right? It's like there is a neurological connection that we all have, that we experience. So if people around you are acting afraid of you or acting or feeling like you're less than, you will pick up on that as well and have a reaction. And sometimes people internalize it and think it's me. Sometimes they think that they're a shy person when really they're a traumatized person. And there are introverts and extroverts, and there are shy people. And hey, that doesn't mean you've had trauma. But my point is sometimes people think that their character traits are who they are when really it's a response to trauma.
Okay. One area that I would love for you to explain a bit is, this word triggered gets thrown around a lot. There seems to be a backlash against the word triggered right now, when in fact we do get triggered. And I wanted to talk about the physical symptoms of past traumas and how we get re-triggered by things.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to kind of some basic trauma theory. And if you're all wondering how this apply to my parenting, let me just point out, I wrote a book called Transformational Parenting, and 75% of the book is all about how we heal ourselves first, because so much trauma gets passed on through generation. There's tons of studies on intergenerational trauma, because it's so covert, we're not aware of it. It's in our subconscious minds. So if we can take the time to really take a microscope onto ourselves in magnifying glass and really focus on some symptoms that we might have or am I sure I'm totally free and I'm feeling safe and neurologically I don't have these triggers coming up, then we won't inadvertently pass them to our children. So let me just say that, prefacing that. But in terms of symptoms and what we call triggers of what trauma looks like, it can be, I guess, there's all sorts of types of trauma, and just not to get, it's hard to lump them all together, but I think it might be more helpful to talk about everyday kind of living. So
Right.
It's not necessarily like, you had something violent experience happen to you and you have nightmares about that. That's a different conversation. So this is the kind of trauma, the kind of everyday trauma that might be a mixture of personal and societal trauma that we may not even know we have. So I just want to specify that as well.
Right.
So what that might look like is hesitation, questioning, a lot of internal self-doubt. It can look like if you're more prone to anxiety. So there's fight, flight, or freeze, are the common reactions to trauma. Fight and flight are healthier than freeze. So what freeze looks like for the sort of everyday, if you have trauma that hasn't been neurologically moved to a memory and is active, but you might not be aware of it, it might look like, choosing to sort of escape a lot of television, a lot of social media, avoiding things that feel intense, also not feeling the urge to move. So, which is why I'll get to that in a minute. Some of what we can do is some very specific movements. And if you are a flight or fight, then that might look like, you get easy to anger, easily frustrated. And I will say, let's just footnote all of this because everyone's saying, yes, we all are feeling that way right now. And you know what? We're going through a worldwide trauma right now. And our kids are, we are, because the more traumatic than something violent happening to us is not knowing if something violent is going to come. So, and being in a place of fear, which is where we all are right now.
Yeah, that uncertainty.
Yes. And not knowing what you can do to protect yourself from it.
Mm.
And not knowing when, little things like not knowing when school's going to start back up might seem like, oh, it's just an inconvenience, but it actually can feel like a trauma, especially if they're other. And we all have. Every human has unresolved trauma. Otherwise, that's the definition of really being a human, right? Is
right.
We have pain and joys, and so yeah, it's different for everyone. But I would say, the easiest way to view it is think about a toddler or a baby and how they're so in the present. And they marvel at butterflies and they laugh easily and they get joy from taking a bite of an apple, right? So that's where we all need to go back to, right? To being so in the now, that joy is so easy to access that we can access it just through a smile, right? Mm-hmm. So the further we get from that, it's through traumas that haven't been processed. And the people that I've worked with through trauma therapy, they go more and more to that childlike state. And that's when I know the therapy is working.
Huh. So how are you talking with your kids right now about these uncertain times? How do you explain to them? Because they are different ages. I'm curious, how do you talk to a teenager versus between the ages of like 5 and 10?
Well, it's funny. We're we're a kind of a busy family. We travel a lot. We love to be active. We're always out of the house. And although I've known the neuroscience for years, we've never done meditation as a family. So that's the one thing that this is a must. So most nights we're doing meditation after dinner. and it's guided meditation. I have an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old. The 15-year-old can do the non-guided meditation, but for most, unless they're teens, for most kids, guided meditation is better.
I'm with Orion. I prefer guided meditation too.
Yeah, right. So that's just a no-brainer for us. We also do family meetings, and that's essential for us as well. And that's where we start off with appreciations and gratitude. That's the first step in our family meetings. And then we talk about, okay, what's going on? Each person kind of shares what's going on for them. And it's, can be about your day, but also we want to get to, what feelings, how you're feeling about all of this. Is it scary? Are you happy? Were you scared and happy all within 10 minutes, right? So we try to process it, as much as possible every night through that family dinner conversation. And we also, the third thing we do is we model that ourselves. We make sure that we're telling them, gosh, this is really hard for me. We're feeling really cooped up. How about you guys? And then fourth, we talk about the science behind all of this. Thank God for the science of happiness, for psychology, for neuropsychology. This information is out there, so we don't have to waste our time guessing what's effective and what's not. We know. So there's certain things that we know are helpful, which we're making sure we do. And I share that with the kids. Movement is essential, especially vigorous movement. Because again, going back to the primitive part of our brain, fight, flight, or freeze being the least, the scenario you do not want, that's basically you're going to get eaten. So vigorous movement where you sweat a little bit helps you feel like you have some kind of control about a situation which we really have very little control, except, to self-isolate and be careful. So, we're making sure we do that as well. And then last but not least, we've also been doing some journaling, and then also laughter and humor and being stupid and silly, right? Because, more than anything, we really need to tap into that place where we're not going into the place where we feel like this is, we're going to die. Although that is something that, is part of the collective consciousness right now and is happening. And we have to, it is something that is true, but we can't live in that space every day. And we know this through Holocaust survivors and Viktor Frankl, meaning about how he survived living in the concentration camps, not knowing what's happening, and he has no control, finding purpose, humor, and love.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I remember reading Man's Search for Meaning, and there's this moment from that book that stands out for me where they were, you can just picture them cold, wearing rags in a concentration camp, and all of a sudden they look up and it's the most stunning sunset, and everyone just stops and looks at this incredible skyline. And, those, like you said earlier, the being in the moment and savoring those awesome moments and savoring that laughter. It is like, those are the tiny things to hold on to in any crisis. And I'm curious, some parents who are listening right now may be re-experiencing their own traumas or having their own internal crisis right now. How can we as parents support our own inner child while we're also homeschooling our kids and helping them manage the emotions of this moment, and maybe working from, we're being asked to do a lot right now. What can you offer those parents?
Yeah, a couple things. Just on the practical sense to start with, we're being asked to do the impossible. And you know what? We cannot do it all. And so teachers are sending ridiculous requirements of parents right now to have them be the teacher and the parent and the working parent and the partner. And right, it's you cannot. So knowing that it's okay if you don't get all the work done, right? for your kids. It's to prioritize and understand it's absolutely impossible. And if there's any time in the world history when that's okay, it's like now in World War II.
Right.
Like,
yeah, this is our moment.
People are going to understand if the kids don't turn in the worksheets on time, right?
Right.
So that's number one. That's practical. From a psychologist perspective, here's what I would love to see everyone in the world doing right now. Bilateral movement. So this mimics what happens when we sleep, which is how we process trauma, which is during eye movement. So it's funny, my kids are in the room right now. When I said that, my daughter just did it. Because this is going to save you, and it's going to seem silly, and it might seem like, what's the purpose of this? Where's my intellectual process? But we are physical beings before we are intellectual beings. And more of our brain is devoted to those primitive movements in terms of healing than it is to thinking happy thoughts. So if this bilateral movement, what I mean by this is, imagine, you have your right side and your left side of your brain and your body. You take your arms and you can cross them, just crossing your arms and then moving in that way. And there's many dance styles, martial arts styles that mimic this bilateral movement. There's capoeira, there's most dancing, hip hop dancing, jazz dancing. They naturally integrate this movement. But what happens is it crosses the corpus callosum, which is the piece that separates the left and right brain. And if you do that repeatedly in a sequence that's similar or faster to your heartbeat, which is why rhythm is so healing and music is so healing, because it mimics our natural healing process that happen when we sleep, you can move that trauma into a memory, because that's what happens when we sleep. It's mimicking EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is the number one research-based psychotherapy for processing trauma. So this is the movement you can do at home.
I am a huge fan of EMDR, but I'm an even bigger fan of dance as therapy.
Yes, me too. So yes. And then you get the added benefit of the joy playing your favorite, music from when you were a teenager or now, right? Pull out your Kanye, whatever floats your boat.
Can I tell you?
Hip hop.
I am obsessed. I'm obsessed with 80s new wave music right now. Like Blondie, the Motels, all that old school stuff. Totally into it.
So here's how to dance while you process trauma. Basically, do your crazy moves, get into that state of flow where you are just like, in your zone, you're singing along, you're dancing, you're sweating. And while you're doing that, make sure you cross the midline of your body. And when I say midline, I mean, what splits your eyes, all the way down. It's the vertical midline of your body. Make sure you take your arms and put them all the way to your right arm to the left side, your left arm to the right side. Kick your legs sideways. So crossing the midline, there's tons of research on this. And so, yeah, you can EMDR dance your way through this trauma, which is my favorite thing.
That's awesome.
A couple other ones, writing down. In fact, I run a nonprofit, and we actually created a website for parents and teens called goodlifeacademy.me. My 15-year-old daughter created a journal based on this conversation we were having, knowing what people need right now. So it's a dream journal, goal journal, and a gratitude journal all in one. And it's free download on the site. Writing your dreams helps you be aware of if you have processed trauma or not and how much further you need to go. Because being aware of the emotional content of your dreams tells you what you are not, what you're subconsciously processing.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number two, of course, gratitude protects from depression and anxiety. Doing it for 30 days, that's all the research is based on that. And then number three, just as soon as you wake up, writing down what you're going to do today makes you feel like you're not living in just like a melting pool of slime, just disintegrating everywhere, right? That gives some structure and some purpose. So back to Viktor Frankl, he talked about purpose. What is purpose? It's this sometimes elusive thought, but he believes, and I really believe this too, neuroscience also underscores this. Purpose is two things. It's love. That's a no-brainer. We all know that. Plus creation.
Nice. Oh, I like that. I like that creation part of the end there.
You do, yeah. So what are you creating today? Is it, creating a stronger relationship with your kids? Are you creating art that makes people feel something? Are you creating something you're proud of with your work? Are you creating a habit of meditation and mindfulness with your family? Creating a habit of sharing authentically during the dinner table, right? But actually writing down what that is and having a consciousness around it creates that purpose.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. So we definitely want to remind people at the end where they can get those journal pages. But before we get there, I wanted to get your best strategies and tips for parents who might notice if their kids are withdrawing or acting out. This can be a really hard time. Maybe they don't already have the greatest communication relationship. So how can parents talk with their kids or help them feel better or feel reconnected during this time?
So I was recently interviewed for the New York Times, and they asked, this is the main topic we talked about. And it's the question that's coming up probably 20 times a day. And here's what I have to say, and it's not what everyone wants to hear, but it's the truth.
Okay. I'll take the hard truth. Give it to me.
So kids will act out during this time. We need to allow that and not try to fix. Our job isn't to try to figure out a way to get them to act normal, but to make our reactions neutral.
I like that.
If we can get to the point where we can be in a neutral space when they are acting out, it tells them that it's safe. And then the behaviors themselves will go away without having to bring in more fear, which is punishment, or our reacting, or our blowing up, right? We would just be adding more fuel to the fire when we have a reaction to their predictable outburst during a time of collective trauma. Keeping ourselves neutral is the conversation we need to be having. Okay. Our neutrality creates that safe space so they can look at us and say, oh, it's going to be fine. Because they're not freaking out.
I can't remember who I learned this from, but it is one of the parenting techniques that I'm like, I think this might be the most magical thing I ever learned about parenting, which was anytime my son was upset or angry or sad, like I would really listen to what words he was using. And if he wasn't using words, I would just notice how he was acting physically and mirroring, like, yeah, you're mad, or yeah, that sucks, or yeah, you're really sad. Like, this is really sad. This is really hard. Just reflecting what he's feeling, not even trying to change it or make it better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, the communication that we can use this as an opportunity to practice best practice communication with our kids right now anyway. And that's one piece of it. Avoiding sarcasm is another. There are so many pieces of, there's also the going away from fear-based motivation, us, processing our feelings in front of them is also very healthy. Like, I'm sorry I blew up at you. I'm feeling a little bit nervous and scared about all this myself. Here's what I'm going to do to help myself feel better, right? That tells them that it's okay. And it also, the other thing is, if we pretend like everything's okay right now, they're the number one BS readers because again, mirror neurons, like we can't like la-di-da and then go in a room like, oh, like binge on like the news or on Facebook, like with this anxiety that we're all feeling. So having these conversations, we're feeling nervous about this too. But you know what? We're together and we're so blessed to be together.
Yeah.
And let's just use this time. Let's think about, and even writing lists of the things that we feel nervous about or scared about, and then the things that we feel grateful for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And I'm happy to share. I have a whole handout on communication skills for parents that we can share.
Oh, great. Where is that?
I'll give it to you and you can
put it in the show notes as they do. Okay.
Because it isn't just something that we can talk about for 10 minutes and then we all know how to do it. It's just like anything. It's a practice. It's learning a new language.
Right.
So, yeah.
Jen, I really, really appreciate your kind and wise thoughts for us all as we go through this. And sometimes it feels like we're totally alone and that we're the only ones having a really hard time. And I just want to remind people, like, you are not alone. We're all going through it right now in different ways. And man, we're just all doing the best we can, right?
Absolutely. And what a beautiful thing to get to have, all of this time with our kids. Mm-hmm. And there's also, like the authenticity of it. The real ability to share in this experience together, regardless of your age.
Yeah. And it's okay for anyone. Like, this is something that we've been in conversation about. Like, it's okay to ask for time alone. It's okay to want to be by yourself. And it's okay to ask for a hug. Like, your needs for togetherness or alone time might change throughout the day or throughout these weeks. That's okay too.
Yeah. Parent time out is one of the main tools we recommend.
Well, Jen, thank you so very much. I wanted to plug your book again, Transformational Parenting. And people can go to the goodlifeacademy.me to the resources page for the journal pages that your daughter created. That is so cool. I'm totally going to go check those out. Any last thoughts of wisdom or hope that you want to share?
I just want to send big love and hope and lots of gratitude for all the parents out there doing this miracle work during this time, and how we can all stay connected and be in our best authentic places, and just how best doesn't have to always mean perfect. It just means authentic.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to all my listeners for tuning into this bonus episode. Dr. Jennifer Johnston-Jones, take good care, my darling. It's great to hear your voice.
Thanks, Alex. You too. Lots of love.
Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Her Rules Radio. Just in case you want to find out what your values are and double down on your unique excellence, you can go to alexandrajameson.com/values and download the Unveil Your Values workbook. It's an incredible guide to help you really hone in on your core values, and then discover a few ways that you can use them every day to help you make quicker, more graceful, more laser-like decisions that help you feel really confident in yourself and help you commit to your creative dreams and your self-care. So again, go to alexandrajameson.com/values and download your free Unveil Your Values guide.